Okay, let's unpack something truly counterintuitive today. We all have this strong mental image, right? The mining industry, you picture something rugged, historically very male dominated. But what if that picture is profoundly incomplete? And what if understanding the real history and the current gender dynamics is actually critical for the future success of this absolutely foundational industry? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into gender in the mining industry, and we're drawing from a really fascinating chapter in Mining and the Environment by Dr. Karl-Heinz Spitz and John Trudinger. Our mission: to uncover the surprising, often hidden history, the stubborn barriers that still persist today, and the compelling data-driven reasons why gender equality isn't just about fairness. It's actually a powerful business imperative for one of the world's most, well, essential industries. So let's rewind a bit. When you think about women in mining historically, what comes to mind? For a very long time, there was this widespread, deep-rooted superstition. The idea that if a woman entered an underground mine, bad luck would inevitably follow. Seriously. This belief was so strong, it actually shaped company policies well into the mid-20th century, actively preventing women from going underground.
Yeah, it's quite something.
You even find these old European traditions, like placing an image of the Holy Lady at mine entrances, asking for protection specifically for the men working below.
And what's truly fascinating here is how this persistent superstition just stands in stark contrast
Yep.
to the historical reality. The research clearly shows that throughout the world, women have always been involved in extracting minerals and materials. It wasn't just men.
Always. Like, how far back?
One of the earliest accounts we see dates back to the 2nd century BC. It describes female forced labor in Egyptian gold mines. And for centuries in Europe, women performed incredibly physically demanding jobs, both underground and on the surface.
Doing what exactly?
Oh, breaking ore, sorting it, hauling, smelting, processing. Even operating things like windlasses in medieval mines. In England, they were known as balmaidens in some areas, or pitbrow women in others. Literally pushing coal wagons, sorting ore.
Yeah.
Hard physical work.
Wow. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting then. This widespread involvement, especially underground, it came to a dramatic halt in England after the Mines and Collieries Act in 1842.
That's the key turning point.
Yeah, and this act was passed after a horrific tragedy. 26 girls and boys aged just 7 to 17 drowned trying to escape a flash flood in a coal pit. Just awful. The sources contemplate that this tragic incident, or maybe just women visiting mines during these disasters, might have ironically given rise to, or at least reinforced, that whole bad luck superstition.
It's a plausible connection, isn't it? And if we connect this to the broader impact, that 1842 Act wasn't isolated. It eventually snowballed into the global banning of women in underground mining. It got codified in legislation like the Coal Mining Act 1925 in Queensland, Australia, and the 45th Convention of the International Labour Organization in 1935, a really widespread effect.
Okay, so that pushed women out of underground work globally.
Underground, yes. But it's important to note, women continued to work in surface mining. For example, indigenous women prospected for gold right alongside men, places like Australia, Brazil, the American West, well into the early 20th century.
So it wasn't just legislation driving this shift then?
No, not entirely.
Beyond the laws, women gradually withdrew from the industry due to a whole mix of factors.
Exactly. You had the pervasive Victorian-era concept that women belonged solely in the home, which also limited their economic rights. They couldn't easily be shareholders or landowners. And then you had the sweeping technological changes brought by industrialization, which shifted the labor needs.
And for those women who did remain?
Well, they often faced discriminatory wages, poor working conditions, making their immense contributions largely invisible. It's a striking point in the research that even historians reinforced this systemic exclusion. They often presented mining as exceptionally masculine, depicting women as, quote, irrelevant to the dynamics of the industry, or sometimes misguidedly as passive victims like prostitutes or domestic battlers.
So these perceptions became deeply ingrained, basically erasing centuries of actual female labor from the narrative.
Precisely. It shows how powerful those social narratives can be.
That historical context really frames the issue. But to fully grasp today's landscape, maybe we should quickly align on some key concepts, especially how the sources define them.
Absolutely. Good idea. So first, when we talk about gender, the sources define it as the social characteristics a society considers proper for its males and females. We inherit our sex, but we learn our gender.
Okay, sex versus gender. Got it.
Then there's gender equality. That's achieved when all women and men enjoy the same rights, opportunities, can access the same resources, and participate equally in the economy and decision-making. valued for their differences.
Equality as the goal.
And building on that, gender diversity is the practical application of this equality. It's a strategic approach to create more diverse cultures, which, in turn, tend to boost innovation and performance.
So diversity is the strategy to get towards equality.
In a way, yes. And finally, gender mainstreaming is the process. It's about identifying and addressing the concerns and experiences of both women and men at all stages, policymaking, project implementation, everything.
Okay, that's helpful. Gender, equality, diversity, mainstreaming. Despite the overall rise of women in the paid workforce over the last century, mining and construction still stubbornly have the lowest proportion of women employees. Why? Why does this gap persist today, given everything we know now?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it? And today we're seeing some, frankly, striking statistics. Only about 5 to 10% of the workforce in mining is female. It varies a bit by country and company, but it's low.
5 to 10%?
Wow. And it gets even starker at the very top. A report assessed the world's top 500 listed mining companies. It found just 7% of all directorships are held by women. Only 7 CEOs are female.
7 out of 500.
7. And in fact, in the world's top 100 listed mining companies, there's just 1 female CEO.
1.
1. To put that in perspective, there are fewer women on boards in mining than in any other major industry. That includes oil and gas.
Those numbers are incredibly low, just stark. So, from the sources, what are the specific and most impactful barriers keeping female participation so low in mining today? It can't just be the old laws anymore.
No, the research points to several unique, persistent barriers still very much in play. A significant one is the lack of flexible work arrangements. Mining schedules are often very rigid.
Right, demanding schedules.
And that's compounded by a heavy reliance on fly-in, fly-out, or FIFO labor models. That lifestyle is tough for anyone, but can present particular challenges for women, especially with family responsibilities.
FIFO is a big one.
Definitely. Then there's the pervasive dominance of men in senior positions. This last point is especially critical. Increasing the number of women in senior roles is seen as fundamental for truly shifting company culture and fostering a general feeling of inclusion for younger female miners coming into the industry. Representation matters.
And it's not just about career progression, is it? The sources seem to suggest a deeper impact here, linking it to broader issues.
Exactly. The research really emphasizes that discrimination, which is often compounded by other things like ethnicity, age, or socioeconomic status, profoundly affects women's ability to lead healthy and successful lives. It frequently leads to poverty. Gender inequality and poverty are, in fact, closely interrelated. Women are often overrepresented among the poorest segments of society globally. It's a systemic link.
It's clear there's a significant uphill climb, a really steep one. But let's pivot to the compelling why. Beyond the moral imperative, what's the concrete business case for gender diversity that the sources highlight? Because this isn't just about fairness anymore, right? There's a bottom line argument.
Precisely. And this is where the data becomes incredibly powerful. There was a PwC study, Mining for Talent. It found that in the 18 mining companies where 25% or more women served on the board, so a significant female presence.
Okay.
Their net profit margins were almost 50% higher than the average for all top 500 mining companies.
50% higher, that's huge.
It is. And even in companies with just 1 female board member, they recorded higher average profit margins overall compared to the top 100 mining companies.
Wow.
It's a potential game changer, not just for people, but for the bottom line. It clearly demonstrates the tangible economic benefits of diversity. It's not just a nice to have.
That data on profitability is really compelling. Do our sources offer any sort of real-world examples? Companies actively tackling these challenges and seeing actual results?
They absolutely do. A great example is the Martabe Gold Mine in North Sumatra, Indonesia. This mine actively prioritized gender diversity. They didn't just talk about it. They set internal goals for female employment.
Okay, setting targets.
Yes, and they implemented an affirmative policy for gender equality. Crucially, they based remuneration on skills and capabilities, not gender. Equal pay for equal work, essentially.
Makes sense.
Their efforts also included extensive community engagement and collaboration with their contractors, getting everyone on board.
And the results.
By 2018, their female workforce had risen to 20%, up from 18% in 2015. And women in management jumped to 21% from just 12%.
Significant jumps, especially in management.
Yes, and importantly, all with a remarkably low turnover rate. People wanted to stay. Their CEO specifically highlighted that a main challenge was consistently questioning stereotypical opinions to find the best person for the job. independent of biological factors.
So actively fighting bias.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration of how strong commitment from the top translates into measurable progress.
That Martabe example is powerful. So it's really not just about who's in the boardroom or operating the trucks, is it? The research explains that these gendered interactions, they happen at many different levels within various spheres related to mining, influencing host communities, contractors, SMEs, even the environment itself.
Yes, the ripple effect is immense. You take the operating level, for instance. A heavily male-dominated workforce can, often inadvertently, reinforce normative gender roles. They might completely overlook the complexities of the local communities they're working in.
How?
Even if companies have policies on paper to attract and respect women, they might fail to genuinely sensitize their existing workforce to the actual benefits of female leadership or participation. For instance, stereotypes may be originating from the company's home country, might cast miners' wives as just passive caretakers, with men seen as the sole breadwinners.
Even if that's not the local reality.
Exactly, even if it completely ignores the economic realities on the ground for those families.
And this extends to contractors, too. You mentioned they're increasingly used.
That's right. There's a notable trend towards increased use of contractors, and these groups are often even less gender-sensitized than the main mining company.
Why is that?
Think about exploration work in remote areas. It tends to attract mostly men, right? Then these male geologists typically hire local men to assist them. So in subsequent negotiations about land access or environmental disturbance, women from the community are often just excluded by default. Even if the main mining company has gender-sensitive policies written down somewhere, it creates a critical loophole.
Right, a disconnect between policy and practice. And this applies to small and medium enterprise SME development around mines, too, I imagine.
Precisely. These often informal sectors, providing goods and services like laundry, groceries, maybe entertainment, they often lack regulations about gendered interactions. And while women might sometimes be seen primarily as victims, maybe in sensitive areas like the sex industry that can emerge around mines,
Yes.
the research argues very strongly they should be equally recognized as active economic agents. They're entrepreneurs, service providers.
So how can companies support that?
Companies can actively economically empower local women. They can implement transparent procurement policies that preferentially treat local women suppliers, offer training for roles like health workers, caterers, even things like establishing plant nurseries for land rehabilitation projects. It's about recognizing and harnessing their economic potential, not just seeing them through one lens.
Okay, that makes sense. And community interaction, public consultation, also critical areas where these gender dynamics really come into play.
Definitely. A major criticism highlighted in the sources is that communities are often treated as these homogenous groups. Male representatives are just assumed to speak for everyone, both men and women.
Ah, the gender-blind approach.
Exactly. And it often stems from those male-dominated company cultures and maybe a reliance on pre-existing male-only community groups. It's easier, perhaps. But the failure to genuinely engage women from impacted communities can lead to their rights being undermined.
And missed opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Missed development potential for the sector itself. The research gives concrete examples. Women in the lower Mekong River losing access to livelihoods because they were totally excluded from consultations about a project's impact.
Oh.
Or the complexities of land inheritance being completely underestimated in Kalimantan because women, who often hold crucial knowledge or rights there, were persistently excluded from the discussions.
So essentially, overlooking women's perspectives leads to a fundamental misunderstanding of the actual community, the environmental impact, everything.
Precisely. And that has real, tangible consequences down the line. In the environmental sphere, for instance, women typically use the environment differently than men, different resources, different knowledge. And they're often disproportionately impacted if natural resources like land or water are reduced or contaminated. Yet baseline data collection for environmental approvals frequently ignores women's traditional knowledge and their often multifaceted livelihoods. This leads to incomplete, potentially flawed environmental assessments.
Okay, so we've talked large-scale mining communities. Let's also consider artisanal small-scale mining, ASM. That's a huge part of the global picture, often overlooked, with its own unique gendered spaces.
Absolutely huge, and yes, very distinct gender dynamics.
Yeah.
ASM involves approximately 20 million people worldwide. That's a lot of people. And crucially, about 30% of them are estimated to be women.
30%. That's much higher than the 5–10% in large-scale mining.
Much higher. They extract about 20% of global minerals and metals resources through ASM. Women typically play a much larger role here. For example, there's the Kinkana-e artisanal gold mining community in the Philippines, dates back over 800 years. There, the processing of gold is traditionally a woman's job.
Interesting, but ASM is often unregulated, isn't it?
Yes, that's the major challenge. Because ASM is largely unregulated due to its informal nature, women in this sector are at much greater risk of exploitation, bullying, discrimination, sexual harassment, accidents, exposure to toxic emissions like mercury, often from working or just living very close to the mine sites.
That paints a really stark picture of the dangers involved in ASM for women. Yet, earlier you mentioned flexibility as a draw. How do the sources reconcile that, this paradox of danger, alongside the appeal, especially for rural poor women?
It's a significant paradox, and the sources acknowledge it directly. The research shows that despite these immense risks, ASM often does offer a flexible work environment. And that flexibility is particularly appealing to the rural poor.
Why the flexibility appeal?
It can be more suitable for women who also have, say, child-rearing responsibilities. The hours might be adaptable. And critically, it provides an extra cash income. Often this is in addition to seasonal farm-related jobs, which remain a primary occupation for many rural women.
So it's a lifeline, despite the risks.
For many, yes. It's often a difficult calculation, balancing danger and need, but it offers an economic opportunity not always available in more formal, structured sectors, especially in remote rural areas.
Okay, so we've laid out the history, the current gaps, the business case, the complexities across different scales. What actually works? What are the most effective strategies identified in the sources to address these really deep-seated gender inequities across all levels of the mining sector?
A crucial first step, really highlighted across the sources, is collecting and analyzing gender-segregated data.
Beta.
Exactly. At all levels of the industry, from baseline environmental and social studies through company reporting right into policies and guidelines. Understanding the factual situation with clear data allows for robust, fact-based discussions. No more guessing or relying on assumptions.
And that leads to better solutions.
It leads to practical, effective, and often innovative solutions for gender diversification. It also helps raise public awareness and promotes gender equality more broadly. You simply can't fix what you can't accurately measure or see.
And what distinguishes the companies that are actually succeeding, making real progress? The research points to three kind of game changers that set the most gender-diverse companies apart.
That's right. The first one is persistence. This isn't a quick fix. It takes time, sustained effort to see effective results.
Okay, patience and persistence.
Second, CEO commitment. Real, genuine buy-in from the very top to push changes through the entire organization. It can't just be an HR initiative.
Leadership matters.
Hugely. And third, comprehensive transformational agendas. This means having change agents and visible role models at all levels of the organization, not just policy documents. That Martabe mine case we discussed earlier, it perfectly illustrates this success driven by strong CEO commitment and the integration of gender diversity principles deep into operational policies. Recruitment, training, wages, preventing sexual harassment, the whole package.
So it needs to be comprehensive.
Yes. And other effective approaches include implementing clear gender diversity policies with annual benchmarking targets, holding both the company and its contractors accountable for meeting them.
Targets and accountability.
Definitely. And a major focus should also be placed on education, training, and building capacity for both women and men. It's about empowering girls and women to break down traditional stereotypes, sure, but it's also about educating everyone on the benefits while still respecting the genuine physical needs and limitations of both sexes in what can be a very demanding industry. It needs a holistic approach.
Okay, so from those historical whispers of superstition, that bad luck idea, all the way to the hard data we see now demonstrating increased profits with diversity. Our deep dive today has really shown how complex and, well, multifaceted the issue of gender in the mining industry truly is. It's clearly a field undergoing significant change. Traditionally, harsh working conditions are becoming maybe slightly more amenable to female participation, partly thanks to an increased focus on occupational health and safety and also technological advancements. Things like hydraulic power aids on hauling trucks, making them feasible for individuals of all sizes to drive, little changes, big impacts.
Absolutely. And what this all means seems clear. Understanding each and every interface where gender interacts with mining is crucial for substantial, lasting change, whether it's at the corporate level, the operating site, dealing with contractors, through those SMEs, within host communities, the impact on the environment, or in artisanal mining. You have to look at all of it. As the UNDP stated back in 2017, gender equality and women's empowerment are fundamental dimensions of human development. If half of humanity is not participating in this progress, such development is not universal. It's fundamental.
So as you, our listeners, go about your day, here's something provocative to consider, something from the sources. Mining companies are often reluctant to intrude on local customs. They express fear about interfering with and changing existing social structures.
That's a common stance.
But given that a mine's very existence already produces considerable, often unavoidable change in a community's socioeconomic fabric and its gender roles, is it truly interference to push for early and continued gender-inclusive consultation? Or is it, in fact, an essential, maybe even obligatory step toward a more equitable, more prosperous, and ultimately a more sustainable future for everyone involved in this vital global industry? Something to think about.